Hey guys, this is Slavic Brat here, and I just finished the new Outlast DLC, Whistleblower. So it got me thinking, what makes some games scarier than others, and what are some important facts to note when choosing your horror experience? So most of us have encountered and are most familiar with the instant. Now, you could say that that was pretty scary, but if I were to do it again, it just doesn't pack the same force as the first time. So you can already see the problem here. Jump scares are usually described as being cheap cop-outs and not really representing true fear. Well, in that case, let's look at what true fear actually is. Truth is, there is no such thing as true fear. Rather, there are multiple aspects that represent fear. These are emotional fear, cognitive fear, and fear of recurrence. So what do these actually mean? Well, let's start with the emotional aspect of fear. I think everyone has experienced this particular fear, as it represents worry. Moms watching this know especially well what this kind of fear means, after calling 11 times until their son or daughter finally calls back. Which brings me to the next aspect, which is cognitive fear, and this one has to do with the son or daughter in question. We've all been there, seeing that dreadful message of a million missed calls from your mother, and if you haven't, then you have yet to experience true fear, my friend. The concept of cognitive fear is the anticipation of consequence. We know we're gonna get yelled at, and that makes it all the more frightening. And finally, we have the fear of recurrence. This one is especially useful with babies and their learning experience as they grow up. For instance, one time, when I was very little, my mom was ironing my clothes that I was supposed to wear for my birthday party. Suddenly, my dad called from the other room and she went to see what he wanted, leaving the iron on, but positioning it vertically so it doesn't burn my pants. And me, being 45 at the time, decided to test if the iron was really as hot as it looked, with my chin. Of course, I was none too pleased with the result of the following burning pain, and for the next 2 years, every time I saw an iron, I avoided it like middle-aged Europeans avoided people with the plague. Okay, I think we've established the concepts of fear fairly well, so let's move on to their particular use in gaming. Fast gaming history lesson. Adventure games were the first ones to attempt to creep out the players. Roberta Williams, one of the most influential video game designers of the 80s and 90s, developed one of the first graphical adventure games ever, called Mystery House, inspired by one of Agatha Christie's murder mysteries. Mystery House came out in 1980, and would later win Williams the title Creator of the Graphical Adventure Games genre. The Count followed a year later, and then Transylvania came out in 1982. It wasn't until Atari came out with Haunted House that video games started making the players really jump. Haunted House was designed to intentionally frighten the players. The term survival horror was coined by the original Japanese release of our well-known Resident Evil in 1996, which was influenced by earlier games with a horror theme such as 1989's Sweet Home. These were the first baby steps of the new booming genre. I intentionally brought up Outlast in the beginning of this video. When it was originally announced at E3 and PAX East, people went nuts over how scary it was. One attendee actually fainted while playing it. So what makes Outlast so scary? When speaking about a game, you have to factor in a lot of things like peripherals, atmosphere, graphics, and all of those other game aspects. But when all of those are done right, you're only left with the fear factor to worry about. When your game feels gross, looks gross, and sounds gross, then you can obviously expect the person playing it to feel gross. And Outlast nails this exceptionally well, and even more so in the DLC. I had a very unique experience with Whistleblower, since a friend of mine had told me about a certain gut-wrenching moment that I will not spoil for you. Knowing that that moment was coming made it all the more frightening. That was my cognitive fear stepping up. Usually, games only go with jump scares and fear of recurrence, never really delving too much into emotional or cognitive fear, since most of the times, there is really no consequence in our actions except that we'll have to repeat them if we die, which adds more frustration than fear in the end. However, knowing the consequences changes the whole experience for the better. At the time, I was playing the game with a friend, and when I saw where we were, again no spoilers, I was genuinely frightened and told him, "This is going to be awful." and for the rest of the game, I just felt consistently afraid of what was about to happen. That's the fear the games should be striving for. However, this is not to say that Outlast is the greatest horror game ever. Quite the contrary. I played the original Outlast and it was more frustrating running from the bad guy than it was scary, and only after getting some external stimuli did I become genuinely afraid of the DLC. The problem with all the recent survival horror games is that they are too afraid to add some real consequence to their game except dying. It's scary until the game gets the best of you and kills you, and then it just becomes a grind of, okay, how do I get rid of this guy to actually proceed through the game? The most important aspect of the game becomes the frustrating block in the way, and that's never good where game design is concerned. So game developers, next time you're going to make a survival horror game, try and make it a non-linear experience with some cause and effect. Otherwise, this game genre full of potential will grow stale and die out, and no one wants that.